right. So on the show today, I am joined by a great guest and a topic that when I think about financial planning, a lot of times people don't really ever wake up and say, hey, I can't wait to do a financial plan. But even more so from an estate planning or thinking about anything legal related. But I am joined by Jennifer Rozelle, and she is a attorney and she is a partner in a practice with her husband, and it is the Indiana Estate and Elder Law. And so with that, Jennifer, thank you for spending some time, and we're going to talk all things estate planning and go through that.
Yeah, and it'll be way more fun than it sounds like.
I was going to say, yeah, for those that don't know you, it's like this is actually going to be a pretty, I think, enjoyable episode because you also have a podcast called Legal Tea, and we were just
Mhm.
joking that someone told you a play on words. So you want to share that real quick, and we'll jump in.
Yeah, it was not intentional. It was, and I can't even say accidental because it wasn't my idea, but it's legal tea, TEA. The idea kind of spawned from like sipping the tea sort of thing. But I had someone reach out and say, hey, is legal tea a play on words for legality? And I was like, no, but I like it.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's like sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, and right
Yeah,
there, it's perfect. So,
for sure.
and one thing that I think is awesome that you do is you go through different cases and kind of like walk through like, hey, this big case with let's use like Prince. I feel like a lot of people will talk about, Prince died without an estate plan and like all these issues that come from it, but you'll go through and kind of dissect those, which I
Mhm.
think is really cool. So we'll share a link to that for people that want to look at it. But I guess let's start with when you think about lawyers and attorneys in general, right? People are like, oh, you're an engineer. Oh, you're an attorney. You do all these things.
Yeah.
So you focus on estate planning. So what is a day or a week, let's say, because a day might be a hard one, but what does it look like for you working with clients and what kind of conversations do you typically have?
Yeah. Um, what immediately popped into my brain when you just asked that is, one of my least favorite questions, when people ask me what my normal client looks like. While I specialize in estate planning specifically, um, my clients look very different. They are all different ages. I think of like young adults that just want to get some really basic documents in place, maybe because they've had a couple kids now and really see the need to put some guardianship language in their documents, up to people in their 90s and hundreds, that I don't see them too much anymore, but like World War II veterans, just so and really all sorts of different types of asset levels and what their estates look like. So while I specialize in that estate planning space, my clients are all very different. I think a lot of people, they hear that word estate and they're like, oh my gosh, she only works with people that have like bazillions of dollars. And I don't at all. And actually, that's really not even like my niche, so to speak. I don't work with people that have bazillions of dollars. I would refer those people out. So my everyday honestly looks like, I spend most of my weeks in the conference room. I really don't feel like I'm a lawyer most days. I just get to meet people, hear about their families, hear about their situations, what's going on in their world. That's oftentimes in my world, there's some sort of trigger. People kind of like how you just started with of, people don't love to, spend time in my conference room talking about estate planning. I try to make it fun. There's always laughter in my conference rooms. I try to make it as fun as possible, but most of my week is spent meeting with clients of all different shapes and sizes. Most of the day, I just had a meeting yesterday or maybe it was 2 days ago, that the granddaughter was in the room with her grandparents, and she's like, you really need to get outside. It's so nice out. And I'm like, oh, is it? Because I haven't been outside all day.
Yeah.
So yeah, my whole week, my every day is pretty much spent meeting with clients, prospects, existing clients, of all different shapes, sizes, ages, that sort of thing.
And having conversations that you would have, right, dealing with families, money, tension, right? Like it's never super easy, and everyone's like, well, my family is unique or different. And it's like every family has their story or drama or challenges. How do you help people like kind of navigate that? And I guess let's focus on I've never done estate planning, right? So maybe I'm not revising it, but Like where do I start? What should I be thinking about if I'm wanting to do an estate plan?
Yeah.
Um,
I, I think that, like we have like an initial like information sheet that prospects fill out. It really details, who they are. It details, or asks maybe for details of their family, their beneficiaries, their kids, their assets, do who's on the assets, ownership, beneficiaries, those sort of things. And um, you know, an idea that, or something that just really popped into my head when you just asked that was, sometimes people are reluctant to fill that form out because they feel like we're asking for so much, or dare I say too much. And estate planning is a really, it should be, whether the attorney is asking all the right questions. It should be a very thorough and very private conversation. And if I have a client that fills out that form, that helps me so much to learn about, what has spawned them to come in. That's actually one of the questions on there is, what are you looking to do? What do the answer doesn't have to be perfect. I just kind of need to know what you're looking. And if the answer is, I don't know, Jenny, that's totally fine too. Um, and it also, when you get to the part with children and beneficiaries, it asks about, are there any special needs or special concerns I need to know about these people? And then when you get to the asset piece, who do we have as listed as beneficiaries? Do we right now have our parents? And that's probably not appropriate. So that is so, less is not more in my world. More is more, I guess is the way to say it. The more information I can have, the better that I can be an attorney for my client. So I think, what I would tell people is go in with an open mind, and also it's okay if you don't know what you don't know. Most of my clients don't know what they want or that they need. Um, so really just following the process of disclosing information and not having any thoughts that, your attorney is like, secretly judging you on the other side of the table because you have a kid that's estranged, or that you have a kid that has maybe some sort of addiction issue or something. Um, to be honest, Isaiah, I mean, when I actually have a client in front of me that I kind of call it like my all American, like perfect little Pleasantville family, that it's like when I have no issues, I'm like immediately suspicious. I'm like, you're not telling me something. It's so uncommon. And so I say that from a place of like, don't feel like you need, or maybe that you should hide anything, because I can't do my job if you don't really explain what's truly going on.
Yeah, I think the way that I would look at that would be a little bit like, Instagram shows the best 10% of
Oh,
everyone's life, right? And so
yeah.
there's this portrayal of, hey, happy family. We just had Easter. We're gonna go and have our, our vacation or holidays, all stuff. It's like, well, then there's reality, right? And
Hmm.
everyone doesn't necessarily always get along. And so you want to bring that in, and it's hard to build trust and share all that stuff. And it
Yeah.
takes time to where you can't say, hey, so we just met 5 minutes ago. So tell me all the drama and problems with your family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trust Jenny. I got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
trustworthy. So tell me about that, right? And it's going to take time. But yeah, I think the idea of there's going to be some sort of triggering event. And a lot of times people might be told like, yeah, my parents told me, or a friend told me, or someone told me, you need to get a estate plan. You don't have an estate plan, because they might be talking at work or, out with friends like, oh yeah, we just did this thing, blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, get in the car. Do we need one of those things?
Yeah. Yeah.
What does that entail? So when you think about, let's think about first time doing an estate plan, kind of the initial needs, bare bones. What are kind of the core tenets, and then why do those maybe matter? Which is an easy question, and I know it's a more lengthy answer, but you can kind of high level, and then we can dig in each one if you want.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I think of a really basic estate plan, like the most basic one, I think of primarily three documents, so to speak. So, first one being kind of the healthcare one. So, who's going to navigate healthcare decisions if you can't. That's an appointment of healthcare representative or a healthcare power of attorney. Usually embedded in that document is a thing called advanced directives. What that basically is like little like the medicals, the more specific medical decisions. So think like feeding tube, resuscitation, all those sort of things. That's usually embedded in one document. Sometimes attorneys will bust those up into a couple, and neither way is better or wrong. Um, the second document is a financial power of attorney. So that one is giving someone the ability to step in and make financial and legal decisions for you if you're unable to. Um, I think those two documents, I think as young adults specifically, they kind of skip past that. They go, their brains go straight to will, like a last will and testament. And those are so equally as important, because I think a lot of times those get used for much later in life. So think, cognitive impairment, whatever. But things happen every day to young adults. You get into a car accident. You, I don't know, think of any kind of bad luck kind of thing. Something could happen to you just because. I mean, I just finished helping a young couple in their early 40s where the husband had a massive stroke. Um, Otherwise healthy guy, like, would have never expected that to happen. So those kind of life altering events don't just happen when we're older, they happen when we're young too. So those two documents super vital to be able to get someone to make those healthcare and financial decisions for us if something happens. And then the third document that I think of in a really basic estate plan is a last will and testament. So that's probably the most well-known document in my world. I have people all the time come, call my office and say, I just need to get a real basic will done. Um, Wills come with a ton of misconceptions, and I can dive into them if you want me
Yeah,
to.
let's do it.
You want to? Okay,
Yeah, let's
so
do it.
I think the I think the biggest misconception that I see, and I see it weekly, is that, well, two. One is that a lot of people don't understand the kind of asset a will controls, and I'll get into that in a second. And then the second thing that people, um, that they have misconceptions about is that wills avoid probate. They do not. So hear me loud and clear. Wills do not avoid probate. So actually, that one's probably easier to tackle. A will is a document that the words on the document mean nothing until you go through that probate process. Um, a probate judge has to basically say that this will is a valid will, and I effectively and officially appoint Joe Schmo to be my, executor, personal representative, whatever. So that can't happen unless we go through the probate process. So probate happens when you have no will at all or just a will. Now back to the whole asset thing. I think a lot of people, they think that, a will just swoops in when we pass away and like sprinkles like magic pixie dust on everything and like takes care of everything. That's we should know better than that. It's not that easy. In fact, when someone passes away, what my office does internally is we bring them into the office and we actually have kind of this big spreadsheet form that we use. And what we're doing is we're figuring out whose names are on assets and what beneficiaries are attached to them. And why we do that is because a last will and testament, the only kind of asset that a will controls are assets that have one name on them. So anything jointly owned, for example, that a will doesn't apply to. So think like a joint bank account, between a husband and wife, for example. That's just going to go, it's going to legally default to the surviving owner at one of their passing. So wills only control assets that are in one name and not or and have no beneficiaries attached. And so, you think of brokerage accounts, retirement accounts, life insurance. Those often have beneficiaries attached. Whether they're the right ones is a whole different can of worms. But when you're kind of especially when you sit down to come up with like an estate plan and, talk about, is a will enough, whatever. Um, at the end of the day, depending on what you end up deciding, you really have to determine, okay, if I'm going to do this will, I've got to get these assets to support this document too. So a lot of times in, a married couple, for example, usually the will is not controlling assets at the first passing unless you have assets still individually owned, which I sometimes see. Um, but that's just a kind of the message to hear me sort of loud and clear with wills is it kind of makes my body shiver when someone says, I just really need a basic will. Okay, basic wills exist, and we need to talk about assets and how we're going to get those assets to support what we're trying to do in that will. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. Because one of the other questions I was going to ask was the idea of a kind of a will based plan, trust based. When do trusts come into play? Because I know that's such a I was asked like non-consensus views, and so I feel like if we had 10 estate planning attorneys and we asked like,
I
hey,
know.
so when does a trust come into play? You're going to get very different answers, and
Yeah.
people are going to have very strong opinions.
Hmm.
Um, so for your
Hmm.
opinion on that, how would you address when it makes sense or maybe when it doesn't?
Yeah. So there are two, generally speaking, types of trusts out there. And then there's like subtypes of these. So part of the confusion and part of kind of the, I want to say, disagreement between different estate attorneys is because there's so many different types of trusts out there that sometimes we're talking about different trusts and we're disagreeing about different things. So generally speaking, there are two types of trust. There's something called a testamentary trust, and the other type is called a living trust. A testamentary trust is a trust that's actually inside your last will and testament. A living trust are things like, sometimes you'll hear people talk about revocable living trusts or irrevocable trusts. Those are living trusts. So, in a really basic will pack, so even like those documents I was just talking about, I have I have a lot of clients that will do those three documents, and in their last will and testament they will have me build in testamentary trust, especially for, say, like minor children, or if we have special needs beneficiaries. um the thing you have to, and this is really getting into like the whole piece of like, does a trust make sense or not, though those are really important, and I have a lot of people that have me do those kind of trusts. The thing you have to know and remember is, again, if those kind of trusts inside your last will and testament, called testamentary trusts, to use those is going to require us to go through a court process called probate. And so if it's a goal to provide some, specific distribution pattern for, say, minor kids or special needs, or whatever reason, maybe we want to set up trusts for the kids and they're all hunky-dory, but maybe we want to protect their inheritance because we're worried about divorce or something. Inside a last will and testament, those trusts are going to have to be created through the probate court process. And so sometimes I have clients that they'll say, okay, well, how do we do this? How do we, do everything we're talking about, but not go through the probate court process? That's why people talk about living trusts. So that's really where the disagreement, I don't want to say disagreement because I think people just have their opinions in it. My opinion is I don't really have one. I really don't have an opinion because it's not my plan. My job is to explain what the options are on the table, and the client can pick from there. I do know attorneys that'll say every single person needs a revocable living trust. I don't necessarily agree with that, but again, that's my opinion. And I try to not insert my personal opinion on these sort of things. I'd rather the client understand what their options are and take the baton from there in choosing. But the reason people talk about those living trusts are because living trusts so long as assets support the living trust. And what I mean by that is you got to transfer assets into the name of the trust or have the beneficiary of assets be the trust. So long as that's all done, then trusts avoid that probate court process. So it's kind of the win-win option because you get to really spell out like, okay, this is what I want to have happen if something happens to me, and we get to avoid that probate court process. The kicker, I always tell people, if it sounds too good to be true in my world, it is. You're missing something. I've never come up with something that I'm like, just sounds so good and there's not some catch. The kicker with that, people are like, well, why would I not do a revocable living trust then? It's because they're more expensive. And so they're more expensive when you do those kind of living trust plans. They are going to be more expensive than those kind of first three documents I talked about, and even doing like testamentary trust in the last will and testament. So sometimes people, come to my table with like sort of a number in mind of what they're willing to spend. And they're like, oh my gosh, yes, let's do this revocable living trust. And then they're like, oh, I wasn't really wanting to spend that much. Um, so that's kind of the scoop of like why people throw around this trust word. And from there, it's really dependent on, the client situation as to one, what they want, and two, what they're, willing to spend, honestly.
If you can improve the health of an animal, you do it, right? Of course. That's what makes veterinarians special. You're mission driven. My friends at LifeLearn are the exact same way. For over 25 years, they've been partnering with you and your peers, providing affordable, customizable, online software solutions. These solutions save time, increase efficiency, and assist in managing all aspects of operations. Why? They want to help you improve your partnership with pet owners to improve pet health. LifeLearn has award-winning digital media solutions and are leading the pack as they've prioritized having extensive veterinary knowledge throughout their teams. That difference is seen, it's heard, and it's read by thousands of people across the country. Relax, grow, and thrive with LifeLearn. Click the link in the show notes for an exclusive offer to see how LifeLearn can allow you to get back to what you do best. Yep. And why do so many people talk about wanting to avoid probate? I've heard my own versions of this from various, peers of yours, and I think probably you as well. But one that I've always heard is privacy. Is that
Yeah.
the correct way to look at it, or are there
Yeah.
other things that would be more beneficial there?
Yeah. So thank you for asking that because I usually go on that soapbox. But um, what what you'll learn about me is I never come from a place of like I never come from a place of like inserting my opinion. Um, what I always tell people about probate is there's three non-negotiables about it. Whether the client cares about them or not is up to them. And I kind of have a little bit of a bugaboo with, people like shouting from the rooftops about, oh my gosh, probate's like your worst nightmare come true. And I do probate all the time and I don't even step foot in the courthouse. It's just a big old paperwork shuffle. It's a lot of work, but it's not, I just don't really like when people use kind of that fear tactic. So that's why I explained that there's three non-negotiables that you just have to be cool with. And if you're cool with them, then maybe a will is sufficient. But if any of them are going to keep you up at night, then maybe you do need to look at more planning. Privacy is one of those non-negotiables. So the three really quickly are privacy, time, and cost. So what people blab about with the whole privacy thing is basically anytime you're going through the courthouse, anytime you're going through a court process, it's public record. Um, it's no different than if you have too many drinks one night and you get busted for a DUI. All of that stuff, if there are charges and it's going through the court system, it is public record. And so your nosy neighbor Nancy could get on, you know, every state has this, I assume. Indiana, we definitely do. A website that's basically you can go to it, type in the person's name, it'll pop the estate up, and you'll be able to see like how much is going through the estate, who the beneficiaries are, that sort of thing. Um, To which maybe it's just because I'm so sensitive to not inserting my opinion. I sometimes come to like this, or maybe it's because I'm a lawyer and I can always argue different sides. Um, I feel like a lot of people don't even know where to go to look. So while people say, "Oh, it's private, it's private, it's private," um, sure, it's public record. Like that's a fact. Period. End of story. Um, whether nosy neighbor Nancy is getting on there, maybe, but a lot of people don't know where to go to look. But it is public record, so you just have to kind of know that and be cool with it. I have some clients that are like super duper private, and they're like, "I don't want nosy neighbor Nancy to be able to see anything." So that's really dependent on whether people care about that.
Yeah. And a lot of people are just too busy. Like, if am I gonna just spend the time to go dig into other people's stuff, or do I
Yeah,
have enough drama and things that I need to focus on in my life? But again, there
yeah.
are people that I'm sure that brings them joy to go and find out information about other people they know. And
Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
that's there.
Yeah, yeah.
So the other two,
Yep,
so we have privacy, which is the one that
yep.
I always think about.
Yeah, yeah. I don't give that one much thought just because like what we just talked about, like a lot, I know where to go to look. I'm not even going to say the website cuz it's not even worth it. But I'm on that website all the time because I'm constantly in like different, court cases that I have to look up things. So I'm in it all the time, but a lot of people don't know where to go to look. Um Time and cost are the other ones. So time, what I mean when I say time is that probate doesn't happen overnight. Even setting, even thinking that is a total pipe dream. Even doing a trust, if you did a revocable living trust, that's still not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a shorter process than probate is. But what people say about kind of the time of probate is that it's just going to take some time. Um, I set clients' expectation that it is minimally going to be a year. If it is somehow below a year, I just look super cool and super awesome. But most of the time, it's not less than a year. Um, but it can be more. There's no maximum. The longest one I ever worked on, I think, was close to 7 years. Um, Crazy, right? Granted, there was some fighting in that one, and so that's what really prolonged things. But there's no maximum. Like, so long as we're keeping the court apprised, it could drag on for a long time. But in a really normal probate case, you're looking at probably a year, year and a half. Of just getting through the process. There's parts of the probate process that we cannot push the accelerator down on. That it kind of reminds me almost in a way of like a real estate closing where it's like you do a whole bunch of stuff and then we wait. And then we do a whole bunch of stuff again and then we wait. So there's a lot of parts of the probate process that it's like a lot of hustle bustle and then we have to wait because there's certain periods of time that have to pass before we're allowed to go to like the next step. Like for example, one of the parts of the probate process is what they call creditor claim period. Um, we have to give creditors 3 months to be able to make claims on the estate, whether you have creditors or not. You may have zero, you may think there's no creditors out there and we still have to wait, give the creditors 3 months to make a claim on the estate. So that's what I mean, that it just takes some time. And so sometimes I hear clients say, especially young families, I think I hear them say often of, does that mean stuff is going to get frozen? My assets are going to get frozen, while we're getting through this process. And initially they probably are. They probably are going to get frozen for some temporary period of time at the beginning. We'll get them unfrozen, but at that very beginning stage, that may mean that someone needs to kind of foot the bill for the kiddos until until we're able to get our hands on the money. Um, so sometimes people have they're legitimate concerns about the timing of things. But if we have people in our life that, if that does happen, that, that can kind of sort of foot that bill at the beginning, we can get them reimbursed and make them whole too. Um, and then the cost, am I okay to go on the cost one?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. The cost factor, I actually think that's the one I give the most credit to, I guess, of why people kind of make probate sound like it's the worst thing ever. Um, what I hilariously think is funny about probate and specifically lawyers. It's my own profession. God love lawyers. Sometimes they
You can
drive
make
me.
fun of them. So yeah,
Oh my
right. Like
gosh, they drive me nuts sometimes. They'll say, "Oh, the probate costs. Oh, the probate costs." What that means is the legal fees. The probate costs, I mean, to actually get a probate case started with the county here in Indiana is like a couple $100. And we may have, a couple $100 to publish the estate in a newspaper and a couple, just little things like that. But the probate cost that warrants the most concern are the legal fees. And don't let anyone tell you differently. Um, Legal fees. So the kicker about this is and it's another little bugaboo of mine that at least in Indiana, I don't know about others, and I know you have listeners in other states.
and I was going to make that comment. You want to address that real quick? I know I'm interrupting you, but
Yeah, you're
that's an important one.
yeah, yeah. So I only practice in Indiana. Um, I do find a lot of states are pretty similar in this whole estate world, are very similar. There are a couple states out there that are a little funky sometimes. Like California, Louisiana, and New York are the ones that immediately come to mind, that they just have some funky things going on in their statutes. So, yes, so this whole episode, I can only speak to Indiana, but a lot of states are pretty similar in this regard. Um, but what I was going to say is that probate is one of the few fields in the law that to get a probate case started, your executor has to hire an attorney. And that's a bugaboo of mine because especially in those like little all-American Pleasantville families, I'm like, come on, like do they really need someone like me to get through that process? Indiana says yes. So the executor has to hire an attorney. And from there, in my weird brain. That's like a textbook monopoly. It's like basically the executors have to work with someone like me, and my only competition are other estate attorneys that do this. And so unfortunately, the legal fees for probate are not incredibly, I want to say, regulated. There's got to be reasonableness to it. So if someone says like your probate legal fees are a bazillion dollars, unless you're like Bill Gates or something, that may make sense. But most of the time, estate attorneys that do probate will charge a percentage of the estate to go through the probate process. Um, it is an attorney specific number. Um, so it's I always say there's got to be like the reasonableness sprinkled in there. So, if an attorney computes, say, 2%, 3%, whatever their fee is, and they can't justify the work to be that, then that's a concern. I mean, that would be, if I was a client, that would be a concern of mine. So when I think of cost for probate, it's really the legal fees that are in my brain of um, you know, what is that going to be? And oftentimes the probate legal fees usually end up being more than what a revocable like living trust would have cost. So it's kind of like this weird like teeter-totter of like, oh, do I spend more now to prevent that later versus, do I spend, less and maybe have to spend more later. Um, yeah. So that's that kind of final non-negotiable is, and it's a non-negotiable because they have to hire an attorney. And so this is going to be an issue.
Yeah, and I love that. It's pay now or pay later. Like you're going to pay one way or another. So just kind of go through. And I think what you mentioned before, the idea of discussing it and explaining it, and then saying which do you prefer versus
Yeah.
trying to interject. Well, this is what Jenny always thinks you should do
Yeah.
because this is the right way. This is what I do. And I'm
Hmm.
sure you have clients ask you, so Jenny, what do you do? Right?
Yeah.
Do,
Yeah.
do you get that question? Because I think it's
Oh
similar
yeah.
to financial planning, right? Where it's, well, what would you do? Well, the
Hmm.
goal is not that you hire someone to run your life, right? You want them to say, okay, what's important to you? What does your family look like? Let me understand that. And this is what I think makes sense based on what you're telling me.
Hmm.
But this is this is maybe the pothole that you should look out for that maybe would change my mind. But, you know, you should
Yeah.
drive the decision. Don't ask me. Like, I don't want to
Yeah.
make your life decisions.
Well, I mean, it's the kind of the classic, like, the facts are different. Like, if I'm sitting across from someone that has kids and like my husband and I don't have kids and we run a business. Like my fact situation is potentially different than theirs, which would potentially warrant a different course of an appropriate plan. But yeah, I get that question all the time, I'm always really hesitant to answer unless they really push me. But I usually say the caveat of my situation's different than yours, so don't let that go in one ear and out the other because it's really not that important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with, I guess, case study or stories or something that you feel like does a really good job at explaining the why for estate planning, and whether it's, hey, this, I guess the successful ones aren't as exciting, right? It's always
Yeah.
the, you talked about earlier, the fear. It's like, you don't necessarily want to do that. But is there any stories, examples, and whether it's something that, maybe you've done or seen or your team's seen, or it's a peer of yours that you've heard a story? I know you do some case studies, so I'm always curious to kind of hear a story that you have that drives home the value and why you want to do estate planning.
Yeah. I think, and that's unfortunately pretty much all of those examples are the client either failing to plan or they've slipped up. They've slipped up on something, and so say like a beneficiary designation gone wrong kind of thing. Um, you know,
On the
un-
beneficiary piece, sorry, I
no,
have a
you're
question
fine. No,
now. I'm
yeah.
thinking the idea of if you're doing the trust based plan and then making that a beneficiary and then the retirement account
Mm-hmm.
as the contingent, and there's some issues there at times if it's not specifically stated. Can you touch on that at all, or do you have
Yeah,
any thoughts on that, or if it's
yeah,
not a great question? Because sometimes I'm like,
no,
I know enough to be dangerous to ask it, but I don't know the
yeah.
answer. So
No, it's actually a really beautiful example of um I think it's so that kind of where my brain immediately went to when you said that is I firmly believe I can't do my job if I don't if I haven't had a conversation with like their financial planner and or their CPA, depending on how involved those people are in their client situation. um I think our roles are very intertwined. They are very different roles, but they are very, very intertwined. And so I think that's a perfect example of, I've had this conversation a lot with financial planners specifically, because you guys approach things from a different perspective, right? And so one of those perspectives is, watching out for, uh, you know, are we going to make this move and get, hit in some sort of tax way we really didn't want to be hit with? Um, so what I would say about that is I come to the table with, okay, so if we have these pre-tax retirement accounts and say we have a really specific distribution pattern, like we want uh X at 18, Y at 25, Z at 30, whatever. So it's kind of like a tug of war in my mind because it's the client's like, okay, well we have this distribution pattern in our will or trust, honestly. Um and if we want that to govern, then like I said, we've got to get the assets to support that, right? Or the assets set up to support that. Maybe it's a better way to say that. Specifically with pre-tax retirement accounts, the issue there is depending on what we decide to make what we're trying to have happen may make Uncle Sam really happy. And in doing that, sometimes that's the tug of war that I'm kind of referring to, where the financial planner's like, hey, John and Nancy, okay, you did this trust, you have this pre-tax retirement account. If we put the trust as, say, the contingent beneficiary, because we usually leave the spouses as primary, And then if we're going to make the trust govern, then we'll put the trust as the contingent beneficiary. Where your guys' brain immediately goes is, oh my goodness, to get that in there is likely going to be a significant taxable event. Um, and again, I kind of come from the place of really letting the client decide based on the facts at hand. So if they're, say, really heavy in retirement accounts, then maybe we put the kids as like the human beneficiaries of those pre-tax retirement accounts to lessen the tax blow that's going to, potentially going to cause if we put the trust as the contingent. But we're going to sacrifice the distribution pattern in the plan in doing so. But what I always tell people is those pre-tax retirement accounts are not your only asset. And so maybe that distribution pattern is going to govern bank accounts, life insurance, brokerage, the house once it's sold, which is usually still a pretty significant chunk of change. I have clients fall on both sides where they're like, I'm willing to pay Uncle Sam more and put the trust as the contingent beneficiary, knowing that this distribution pattern will happen if something happens to me. Conversely, I've had clients say, okay, let's set the humans up as contingent beneficiaries on the pre-tax retirement accounts and let everything else fall to the trust. So it's, again, I don't, and it's kind of your classic, I mean, nothing in our worlds, right, or like a one size fits all. We all know that. And so I kind of, with those pre-tax accounts, that's how I approach the conversation of, okay, I actually save the retirement accounts towards the end because we do the funding process in house. So we help the client get your assets where they need to be for the trust to actually work. And I save the retirement accounts for the very end of the conversation because I know it's going to be more lengthy than all the other assets. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I always pride myself in this podcast as trying to ask questions and then shut the hell up and let guests talk. And then I was
Okay.
like, oh, here's a question. They're like, no, 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 no. I'm going to interrupt you. Don't answer that one. Answer this other
Yeah.
question. I was like, oh,
No.
my brain. So
Yeah. Yeah.
back to it answers the question. I think that's helpful. And I think the ultimate takeaway for a listener is it's nuance. And there's a reason why there's professionals out there that kind of go through this. And
Mhm.
going back to the state by state kind of ruling, it is important. There are nuances, but a lot of the estate plan, as you mentioned, which is why I wanted to have this conversation, it is pretty universal. A lot of these kind of big picture topics are going to be applicable across the country. But
For sure.
with that, back to if you could still remember, since I interrupted you, the case, like a case study or an example of estate planning either that's done really well or that's been filled with a little bit more drama than what people wanted.
Oh my goodness. I have such good case studies for all. Um, one that I'm thinking of that's like a glass half full, like positive, good is, I think of cases where I've had beneficiaries that are battling very personal issues. Think addictions, think whatever the case may be. And really setting clients' plans up in a because I think what breaks my heart in those kind of situations is oftentimes the client thinks that they cannot leave money and inheritance to people navigating those sort of issues, and that's just not the case. It's going to require a lot of conversation, and it's not going to be the most fun in the world. But I've had so many cases where it's kind of like your happily ever after sort of situations of, we have sort of this elephant in the room conversation we need to have, and things play out exactly how we talked about, whether it's a like a monthly stipend or a quarterly stipend for those kind of people so that they don't get a big inheritance. And big is such a general word. I mean, that's people think big in different ways, but so that those kind of individuals, those kind of beneficiaries don't have this big money drop on them that could fuel whatever they're personally navigating. Um, so I think of those sort of situations, and then kind of the bad the bad case studies, I mean, those are far more juicy, right? Those are all my cautionary tales I talk about on my podcast that I never have a shortage of. I think a lot of people, especially in Indiana, I think our little state gets, catches a lot of flack because we're, flyover country, and it's it's just kind of boring here. But there's so much craziness that happens here. I mean, I've worked on cases where someone's murdered someone, and you cannot inherit from someone you've murdered. So that was a wild, wild case. That was maybe 7 or so years ago. But I think the more everyday kind of, I don't like the word fail. I don't like to use it, but it's the only word that's come into my morning brain. The kind of failures of estate planning are, I think they're often beneficiary designations that have gone wrong. Um, I've seen a lot of accounts go to ex-spouses. I've seen accounts go to parents inadvertently or maybe intentionally over kids, and I've seen those parents not share it and they just spend it. And so it's such a testament to honestly working with people like you to make sure. I think people really fail to realize how important keeping up with those beneficiary designations are, and what they are ultimately, you know, going to have happen to, if we list a beneficiary, what the outcome of that is. It seems so elementary, but it must not be if I see so many people mess up on it. And maybe those people don't have people like you, and maybe that's the issue. But that's a really big thing. I mean, of course, the other big one is people not doing a plan at all. Um, a lot of There's this whole chunk of law, and it's called the intestacy rules. Really fancy name for someone passing away without any kind of estate plan. And what's funny about those is they're not intuitive. Is the best word I can come up with. That, people all the time will say, "Oh, everything will just go to my spouse, and it'll just go to my kids after that." But in Indiana, for example, without a will, any assets that are governed by someone's estate when they don't have a will, if it's like call it a married couple with kids, in that kind of situation, not all of it goes to your spouse. Um, if there's all these little weird nuances, but if it's your first spouse and that spouse has your blood children, actually only half goes to your spouse and half goes to kids. Well, most people would think, oh, everything just goes to my spouse. It's like, no, actually it doesn't. um yeah, so I mean, I've seen that go sideways where kids have had to disclaim their interest in like a house, so that their mom, dad, whoever can maintain ownership of the house. So it's just little slip ups like that. It's really, if I categorize them, it's failure to plan and failure to keep assets updated and those beneficiary designations specifically.
What haven't I asked about that you think is important for people to understand if we haven't covered it? And if we've covered a good chunk of it, that's great. But I always ask this when there's professionals that I know a heck of a lot more about a topic than I do.
So another, probably, actually, I'm glad you asked that because it triggered another thought that I very quickly kind of glazed over it a few minutes ago. But it's a misstep I see a lot of clients make. And I don't know if it's a client's misunderstanding and or if their attorney just kind of failed to really emphasize the importance of this. But when I glazed over talking about funding the trust, so that is really important with those living trusts, so revocable, irrevocable, that sort of thing. um the amount of prospects, and they're not clients yet because I would have funded their trust. The amount of prospects I see that in their kind of initial client meeting that they're coming to me and saying, Jenny, I need to update, I need to revise, whatever. And hey, I have this existing revocable living trust. My brain immediately goes to what the heck is in the name of this revocable living trust? The amount of prospects I see that have a trust and that there's nothing in it, no assets in it at all, is really concerning. And it's like I said, I don't know if it's the attorney is not really emphasizing the importance of making sure your assets get inside the trust, or if the clients just don't understand or whatever. But something I just thought of when you said that was, if any of your listeners have a trust, so they've taken the initiative to do an estate plan and you haven't proactively made sure that your assets are either owned by that trust or the beneficiary, depending on what we want to happen with that. Just make sure your assets are set up in a way to support that trust, because otherwise you paid for a trust that's not probably going to work. It's a huge thing I see all the time.
That's great. And I should have prompted you on this earlier, but this is just the way that I'll just kind of ninja launch it on you, which is I
Yeah.
always let guests ask me a question at the end as we kind of conclude, because
Yeah.
sometimes it's an interesting way to just bounce around a different topic. So it can be estate planning. It can be completely off in, left field. I've had
Hmm.
questions around tattoos, Harry Potter characters, very
Oh
serious
my
stuff
God.
about family. So you can take it any way that you want if there's any question that you want to ask, because it's just been me like asking questions. So
Yeah. I
anything
have,
top of mind?
yeah.
Go for it.
Can I ask two? Am I
Yeah,
allowed to
sure.
ask
Yeah,
two?
sure.
Yeah. I'm
There's
a
no
rule
rules
breaker.
here. I
I
was
was
gonna
going
say
to say,
there's
I'm
no
a
rules
rule
here.
breaker.
No
Okay.
rules.
My first question, do I want to start with the personal one or the
Hmm.
professional one? Which one do we want to go with first?
Either one. Whatever
Okay.
you want to know.
Let's do the professional one. What frustrates you the most working with estate attorneys?
Mm. I would say, I mean, it's probably like a communication thing that you
Yeah.
talked about earlier. Like, as long as everyone's on the same page, I think
Yeah.
anytime, whether it's estate planning, attorney, CPA, it's like the ones that do a good job at like making sure everyone knows what's going on, or saying, hey, we can do a joint meeting if we need to. Like, we always will extend that. But there's others that are like, nope, that's my thing. You're not allowed in here. And I'm like, well, that seems strange if we're trying to help, said client with whatever there's going on. Why
Yeah.
wouldn't we want to all be in the loop on that? Because I think it just is rife with errors if you don't communicate well. So I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Yeah.
that's kind of a boring one, but it's
No.
probably also not shocking. But it's like
Have you actually had
communication.
someone say you're not allowed in the room?
It was a CPA,
Oh, okay. Well, it's still not any better, but
which is strange. But
yeah.
anyways, it was kind of like, hey, we could do a joint conversation. It was kind of like, no, we don't really do that. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, fair enough, whatever.
Okay. Yeah.
So
I'm a
they
big
can just tell me
fan.
after the.
I'm a big fan of collaboration. I mean, it's impossible to be able to appropriately help our client without each other. That's yeah. Okay, my other question is, what are you single-handedly the most proud of? Whether it's
Ooh,
work, whether it's personal, whether it's whatever.
hmm, that's a really good question.
I tried. And what's
Eh,
funny is I'm sure listeners are like, "Oh, he's probably been asked these before."
No, 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 no. Neither one. I get asked a lot about like, oh, how did you decide to go into veterinary medicine? This is just me stalling to think of a good answer. Um, I don't know. Like it's probably just because it was this morning and helping the boys get around and ready. To me, it's like I always wanted to be a dad, right? So I will be, and this is a weird thing that I don't think I've ever shared on here. So I had three brothers. We're the only ones that will have our last name, right? Both of my
Mm,
brothers probably won't have kids, so I have two
yeah,
boys. They will be the
yeah,
only ones that keep the Douglas name moving forward. And I remember talking to my wife when you're dating and going through things and talking about like those big life things, right? It
yeah.
was important to me. Like I wanted to have a son, and I've been blessed. God's blessed me with two kids, and to me that's super exciting. And if I had
Oh.
my way, we would have more kids, but my wife's like, nah, we're done. So, I'm holding out for that. And I always make
Yeah,
jokes, but I think we're done it too. But I would say to me, that is one thing that, yeah, just really, really blessed. And you
yeah.
have people have kids and it's like, we didn't know what the heck we're doing with the first one and we're still learning on the second one, but it's been really fun to watch them grow up. And I'm extremely proud of that. So, part
I
of that goes to
love
my wife. It's not just me doing things. She does a lot. So
yeah, I
that's
love
it.
that. I love
Yeah. So
that.
I think going back to estate planning and thinking about like making the impact of a family and changing things, like my grandfather, who has passed probably 2 years ago, now. Um, had a really good reputation in the family that we came from. You talked about like, Smallville, Indiana, right? Bought farmland, was very generous with his time, helped people out behind the scenes that no one would ever know. When he
Mhm.
passed, there was a lot of people that just, made comments, and I don't live there anymore. But, hey, when I was struggling with XYZ, like, your grandpa helped make this
Mhm.
happen, or just gave us never want anything in return. And, was very generous, very blessed from that standpoint, but he worked really hard to get to where he was, but was very
Mhm.
generous. And I think that's something that it's like, how do you perpetuate that kind of legacy from a family perspective into the future? And
Yeah.
that's, yeah. So that's
Yeah.
the way that I think about it.
I actually that totally reminds me, and feel your
No, no,
listeners
no.
can
This is perfect. This is why
yeah, your listeners can totally steal this idea. So one of my favorite the lovely thing about working with an attorney that just does my field. The annoying thing about the legal field is that we can technically practice anything we want. We choose if we want to practice in specific spaces. So I choose to practice only in this estate space. And what I love so much about it is really molding someone's goals, values, whatever words you want to add to someone's plan. And you just saying that totally reminded me of a client that kudos to them. I use this idea all the time for other clients that they came to the table. We were talking about basically they didn't want to set up if something happened to them. They didn't want their estate plan just to drop on these kids and then the kids be like, well, heck yeah, I'm just going to quit my job for a few years and just like live this cool life. So what they did in their estate plan is when they pass away, their kids are inheriting trusts, which is very common, even with normal estate values. People think that this only gets done in like with people a lot of money, and that's not the case at all. So their kids inherit trusts, and who's in charge of these kids' trusts? What the trust says has to happen is the child has to turn in their W-2 to the trustee, and the trustee will match it. So it promotes the kids not, if they choose to work at, a field or whatever that's going to be minimum wage, well, they're going to get their trust money much slower. And if this child chooses to become a vet, then maybe they'll get it a little quicker. I still love that idea of really combating that idea of being like trust babies. It's such a
Mm-hmm.
stereotype out there. I love it so much because it really promotes like go work, and the harder you work and the more money you make, you'll get this trust faster.
It's
Yeah.
almost like the idea of like, hey, if you save and you put money in your piggy bank, like we're gonna match it as a little kid, and like you see, like,
Yeah.
oh, it's like a little 401k match, and I
Yeah.
kind of like that. The one thing that I think of, and I can hear people thinking, well, what if they want to go do a career that doesn't pay as much, and someone else is like, hey, I'm gonna go be, and again, nothing's
Yeah.
perfect, right? There's always trade
Right.
offs, but it's trying to make sure that someone doesn't sit back and say, hey, I'm gonna inherit all this money, because the idea of the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves is real. I'm sure you see that too,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
First generation makes it, second generation kind of enjoys it, third generation kind of loses it from that standpoint.
Yeah.
I might have butchered it a little bit, but the idea being by the third generation, they forget some of the values. And
Yeah.
so I think that's, again, going back to what I talked about before with my grandfather, it's like, I don't want to forget the blue
Yeah.
collar farming, like hard work matters type of thing, even though that's so far from what I do from a day to day perspective. But it's like, how do you bring those values into what we
Mm-hmm.
do? And
Yeah.
the way that my son is raised, he's not getting raised in a hog farm like I did. So like it's a different way that you see stuff. Like
Yeah.
it's like, how do I make sure that he wants to continue, or they both want to, right? Work
Yeah.
hard in the future. So,
I love
anyways, it's interesting. There's this idea of family governance, right? The idea of like, how do you instill the money values, the
that.
personal
Mm-hmm.
values, the religious values. A lot of times for
Yeah.
people, like this is what's important to us, and
Yep.
how do we kind of move that forward? So,
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, you can do anything you want in an estate plan. You just have to come up with what you want. And that's the hardest part,
yeah,
honestly. I always tell people I'm like I wish I could give people like restrictions, like you cannot do X, you cannot do Y, and you cannot do Z, but there really aren't. And so basically, whatever someone wants to have happen, I can make happen. And that just reminded me of something. Kind of as we wrap up, I wanted to mention that it made me think of this earlier when I was saying, I only practiced in Indiana. I belong to some really awesome, like national organizations. So if anyone ever needs a, solid referral, the national organizations are they're national, but they're very small. And so I know pretty much everyone in these organizations. I've personally worked with them. So if any of your listeners ever need a really solid out of state referral, I should be able to provide one.
Yeah,
Happily I'll do
that's
that.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
And just within veterinary medicine, a lot of times you'll see people that will move, right? So
Oh my
different
goodness.
state,
Yeah.
different things, and you want to make some updates and adjustments. And sometimes like, well, I'm not from here.
Yeah.
How do I, who do I go to? So that's
Yep.
perfect and super helpful. As we
Yeah.
wrap up though, for those in Indiana, they should reach out to you if they need that stuff. But where would you send people to either learn more? The podcast is on all platforms, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
Apple,
Yep.
Spotify, all the good ones, right?
Yep. Yep.
There's other good ones too, not just those
Yeah.
two. Those are the two biggest ones.
Lots
When I
of
look
them.
at who
Yeah.
listens, it's like it's 90% here. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah, where just in general for people to connect with you, and you're on LinkedIn, Twitter, all
Yep.
those
All
spots.
those things. Our website, we have a really solid website. A lot of lawyers don't, but we have a really solid website. It has a lot of good information, even just like really basic, what is this, what is that kind of thing. It's indianaestateelderlaw.com. Yeah, and I'm a big fan of being a resource for people. I don't do hourly work, so my go-to line is always, you're only going to be paying me when you know you're going to be paying me. So if I can be a resource for any of your listeners, feel free to have them reach out. You can reach out through the website and they'll get it over to me. But yeah, that's how you reach out.
Perfect. Thank you for the time this morning. This was great.
Thank you for having me. It was fun, and it's already been an hour, so hopefully I
I
didn't
know.
blab too much.
It's perfect. Recruiting team members in your veterinary practice has never been this hard. You can either bury your head in the sand and hope it goes away or adapt. Enter Guardian Vets. By leveraging best in class technology, you can empower your staff and reduce their workload. Help reduce burnout. You also provide a better experience for your clients and patients, which you want to do as you serve them. The solutions Guardian Vets offers includes after hours triage, virtual CSRs, that know your team and processes, telemedicine, and so much more. Become the employer of choice in your area by offering the best tools to position your team for success. Whether you're starting a de novo, clinic, multi-doctor, or multi-location, Guardian Vets can help you be more efficient and effective. Go to the website, guardianvets.com, click the Get Started button, then let them know that I sent you, right? Let them know the Vet Success Podcast sent you. Get 50% off your first month. Don't let another quarter or year happen before you start making changes because you know you need to. So talk to the Guardian Vets team today and implement a new solution. Have you ever walked into a space and thought, wow, this place is beautiful? There's a reason for that. Architecture has this innate ability to impact emotions and perceptions. My friends at Apex Design Build bring beautiful and functional spaces for veterinarians nationwide. Apex is a fourth generation family run company that is fully integrated from the design, architecture, and construction process. They help you mitigate risk, eliminate surprises, save time, save money, and reduce your efforts. Sounds great. Check out their amazing work and have access to their square footage calculator to help you plan out your expansion or new build. Click the link in the show notes for the exclusive offer and learn more about Apex Design Build. Why do banks seem to always be impersonal, slow to answer questions, or give you the runaround when you need money for your dreams? Enter Panacea Financial. Panacea Financial is a nationwide digital bank built for doctors by doctors. Whether you're a veterinarian in training, practice owner, or aspire to be a practice owner someday, Panacea Financial is a bank designed specifically for you. It was started by two doctors who were frustrated working with banks and so started their own to serve their community. With common sense lending guidelines and fast decisioning, they've helped doctors all across the country start, grow, or acquire their dream practice. Looking to buy into a practice, Panacea helps doctors with practice buy-in loans, and they are funded in a matter of days. If you're ready to join the thousands of doctors nationwide who have decided to get independence from traditional banks, visit panaceafinancial.com today to see how you can get your dream practice started. Panacea Financial is a division of Primis, member FDIC. Finding a job or finding a veterinarian shouldn't be a waste of time. Enter an Offer First. Paul Diaz and team have created something really special with Offer First. Some of my favorite reasons are as follows. Candidates and employers will both have values aligned on the first step, not the last. The sign-up process quick and simple, no resume required. So if you're looking for a job but you aren't really sure, it's as easy as scrolling on Zillow for a home. And finally, if you have a great match, it's based on your each unique requirements, not random keywords. If you want to learn more, listen to episode 179 with Paul Diaz. We cover all of that. The other exclusive great thing that you're going to get from this ad read and from Paul is I convinced him to give an exclusive discount to listeners of this podcast. So for owners, you're getting a 20% discount on both the placement of any candidate, but also access to the platform. Use VSP if you go to Offer First, or the easiest way is a link in the show notes. So check it out. Associates, those looking for a job, same thing. Use the link in the show notes. Use VSP if you go directly to Offer First. But I will donate and Paul will donate to a veterinary nonprofit of your choosing. So each person that signs up gets a vote. Your votes actually count, which is incredible. And so I'll be reaching out. I will handle that. But there's going to be a donation made for any associate or any job seeker that adds on the platform. We want to make sure that not only does the platform help to make sure that you find a better fit, better culture, better role, but it's also doing good in veterinary medicine. Okay, so link in the show notes is going to take you to Offer First. It's going to automatically apply that, but also use code VSP if you go to Offer First directly. And Offer First is changing the game of veterinary recruiting. I want each and every one of you to benefit from it, so check them out today. All right, so there are a lot of great job postings that I want to get to. And so we're going to start off with Bayside Hospital for Animals. Great work-life balance in beautiful Fort Walton Beach, Florida. No weekends, Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, no on-call or emergencies. It's an appointment only here. Currently a 2.5 doctor practice, new owner in 2021, bringing some fresh life into the hospital. The new owner had been there for 6 years prior working, so definitely understands the team, the processes, and the community. Lots of investment in people and new equipment. ProSal is the pay structure. Far too many benefits for me to list. Email BaysideVet251 at Yahoo or call 850-864-1857. Join a thriving, growing small animal practice in Vermont on the Quebec border. Full-time ideal, part-time is considered. The idea is to start with yes with the team, patients and clients, and outdoorsmen or outdoor woman's paradise while being able to practice high-quality medicine. Compensation is write your own structure within production capabilities. Literally, it is the owner wants to find the right person and is happy to negotiate, chat through, and find the right fit. If you want autonomy and a boss that enjoys teaching, reach out to Newport Veterinary Hospital. You can email newportveterinaryhospital@gmail.com. North Central Indiana, looking for an oasis in the chaos. You know, who isn't, right? Come join the amazing team at Fulton County Veterinary Clinic. They strive to foster a fun, fast-paced work environment while providing quality patient care. They utilize the support staff efficiently so that the doctor is available to practice medicine and do what you're trained to do in less time and paperwork, which is great. Lots of investment in new equipment and technology to support you, full-time or part-time available. Small animal and exotics are both seen there, so no ER, no on-call, no weekends, competitive salary with sign-on bonus offered, and far too many benefits to list. Go to Fulton County Veterinary Clinic. So type that in and you'll find the job posting there. Last but not least, join Watertown Animal Hospital. Personable small animal veterinarian wanted for well-established current 5-doctor mixed animal practice in northern New York, which is an outdoors person's paradise. Again, 2 of those. So if you like the outdoors, you can look at Vermont or New York. They have plenty of support staff with 6 CSRs, 6 licensed technicians, 4 animal caretakers, 2 technical assistants, a hospital assistant, a practice manager, and a bookkeeper. Focuses on mentorship and investment on the people and the technology. That's been a strategic initiative by the leadership team. No on-call, 24-hour ER less than an hour away. Salary based on experience, but no less than $95,000. Can be straight salary, pro-sal considered. Want to discuss that with the right person. Tons of benefits. Again, too much to list. Please reach out to watertownpetcare.com for that option as well. So again, if you find a role or a job or talk to anyone and it helps you in any way, I would love to hear that feedback. So please reach out. Let me know what you're able to do. And I will continue to post these. So if you are an owner, reach out to me, let me know, and we'll go from there. And until I hit a capacity of I can't keep recording these, I want to let people know who are high quality owners around the country looking for great help. So with that, we'll talk soon. Thanks for listening to today's show. The comments made on today's show should not be taken as investment, tax, or legal advice. All comments are for educational purposes only. You should talk to your professional team before implementing anything. If you want or need financial advice, my day job when not podcasting is helping veterinarians grow their net worth. Our team is taking new clients, and we are ready to talk to you at any stage of life. Come as you are. I always say, bring the mess, right? Like if things are unorganized, that's okay. There's no prerequisites to become a client. Isaiah Douglas is a partner at Vincier Wealth Management. Isaiah is a registered investment advisor, registered with the SEC. The biggest compliment you can give me in the podcast is to share it with a friend. Reviews help the show get found, and Apple Podcast is the platform that is predominantly used for people listening to the show. If you have 3 minutes, love the show, head over to Apple Podcasts, give us an honest rating and review. It helps more people find the show. Also, the new YouTube channel is up, and I'd love to have you subscribe. Vainly, I want 100 subscribers at least. Lots more, obviously, right? But I get a vanity URL if we get to 100. That would be great. It makes it easier to find the YouTube channel as well. For all of today's links, information, head over to the veterinariansuccesspodcast.com. There you can subscribe to your favorite podcasting platform. It'll be a link to that YouTube channel I just talked about. You won't miss any other episodes, whether you listen on Spotify, whether you have some other ancillary podcast platform. Please like, subscribe, all that stuff. It certainly does help. I appreciate it. Finally, if you want more information, insights, want your voice to be heard, want to share ideas for content, say, hey, Isaiah, I want you to have this guest. I want you to talk about this topic. Go over to the Facebook group. So you can search for the Veterinarian Success Podcast on Facebook or head over to veterinariansuccesspodcast.com, scroll to the bottom about your host, click on the Facebook icon, and that'll get you in the group. But thank you so much for listening. It means a lot to me to be able to see the podcast grow and continue to impact people. So with that, until next time, we'll chat soon.